Hi there, Rob here from the Way Out West YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us. This coming Sunday, November the 19th, from 2 p.m, we have the sensational Lloyd Spiegel in the house. Lloyd will be joined by Lisa Baird on trombone and Tim Burnham on drums, both incredible musicians in their own right. Lloyd has been touring the country, showcasing his brand new release, Baker's Dozen. Please come down and see him at the club. You're guaranteed a great time. This interview has some hilarious parts to it. Lloyd talks about touring outback Queensland and touring overseas. Some very funny stories. Please hit the like and subscribe button so I can continue to bring you these great interviews. So we hope to see you next Sunday at Way Out West with Lloyd Spiegel. Rock on, my friends. Right. And I'm glad to actually interview a musician that has a decent webcam.
I'm just happy it's staying in place. It actually looks very professional, but it's actually sitting up on a series of guitar stands.
All right. All right, mate. We might jump into it. I've been reading a little bit up on you, and I believe that blues and early rock music was a big part of your early life. How did that all come about?
You know, my parents were blues fans. My dad in particular had a lot of blues records, and they were just being played around the house. So I guess if you introduce any kid to that music, they're going to love it. It's you know, I think there's this strange thing about, you know, being into blues. I think everybody is into it if they're introduced to it. And being that I grew up with it, it just seemed like a natural thing. I was probably 9 or 10 before I realized that not everybody was listening to it at school. And as far as, you know, early rock and roll music, Saturday nights, you know, they used to have the 6 o'clock rock program on 3KZ, which I think is now gold. And from 6 o'clock till midnight, they just play 50s rock and roll. And my brother and I would set up little beds in front of the stereo player at home, and my folks would sit and tell me about these musicians, you know, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lewis, and of course I just fell in love with it. And you know, it's pretty, I guess it's pretty common to say I heard a Chuck Berry riff and decided that might be a pretty cool job.
But I also believe your first instrument was the piano. When did you then change over to the guitar?
You know, I played piano because my mother is a classically trained pianist, although she hasn't really played much in my lifetime. And there was always a piano in the house. So that was the instrument that was there, and I played it. Dad had an old beat up guitar, a Harmony. I think it's a German guitar from memory. And I sort of fiddled about on that, but it was piano lessons that I actually took. Only for a very while. I must have been, you know, 4 or 5 by the time I'd switched to the guitar. There was just something about Dad's beat up old guitar. He didn't know how to play it, but it looked cool, and it kind of, you know, was easier to jump on the bed with than a piano. If you try jumping on a bed playing piano, you're going to break your bed.
So true. I'm just I had a question when I'm going to ask it now. Which overseas guitarist did you really dig early? But I see you got a fantastic photo behind you there. Is that Howlin' Wolf and maybe Willie Dixon up there?
That's it, Howlin' Wolf and Willie Dixon. I actually picked that up in there it is, in a store. There was a record store in Los Angeles when I was 16. My dad and I went to, and he was closing down like that day. We happened to walk in, and he was closing down that day. He was pulling posters off the wall and just kind of handing us these posters. Actually, my whole house is still filled with posters I got that day. Some beautiful illustrations, and I was just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I've been lucky to be in the right place at the right time on a number of occasions in my life. I feel very fortunate to try to stumble along my career a little bit, kind of stumble into situations I guess, putting myself in those situations first is a good thing, but that's all part of it. But I've always felt somehow that things just seem to work out, and maybe it's just the attitude that I've had that's made that happen.
Cool, man. I'd really love you to tell our audience about the influence two of Australia's great men had on you, Jeff Atchison and Dutch Tilders. They're really a big influence on you, both of those people.
Absolutely. Look, my dad took me to see Dutch Tilders and the Blues Club when I was very small. I'm not sure what age I was, but Jeff was still quite new to the band at that time, so it was early on for Jeff. And Jeff was playing lead guitar for Dutch's band, the Blues Club, which was kind of the blueprint for all blues bands in Melbourne. Photographs from those days, the audience is just a who's who of the modern era of Melbourne blues, and I think they were all there, kind of attending class, and I was one of them. I just happened to be a lot younger than the rest of them, but Dutch and Jeff have been monumental in my career, not just as musicians, but as humans. They always had time for me. They always made sure that I got up to play. They always made sure I felt good about myself, and I've really taken that on board as I've mentored young musicians throughout my career. And of course, look, those two men we're talking about are two of the finest blues guitar players anywhere on the planet. And I was just so lucky to meet them at a young age and be inspired by them. And you've got to remember, when you're that age, you might be at the Station Hotel in Paran watching a blues band on a Sunday afternoon with a bunch of drunk folks, and you feel a little bit out of place. But those guys may as well have been the Beatles to me. They were a big deal, and I'd steal Jeff's picks, and I'd be scared to talk to Dutch and all that kind of stuff. And even to this day, look, I don't think there was ever a time in my life that I got on stage with Dutch Tilders and didn't feel a little bit nervous. And certainly still with Jeff. I mean, I might play with Jeff once every year or so. I get invited to play a jam somewhere with him, and I always feel like that little kid. There's still so much to learn from them. I just think both men, beautiful humans. And I've actually just recently, this is an exclusive, Rob. I've actually recently acquired Dutch Tilders' Noise guitar, his custom guitar that was built for him in the 70s, I guess. And it came up. A friend of mine actually purchased it kind of on my behalf a long time ago, because it disappeared for some time after he passed, and it came up on eBay, and I saw it, and I asked my friend to buy it because he had the money and I didn't, quite frankly. And he's kind of been holding on to it for me for a little while. And during this tour, I decided that I should reward myself and finally take ownership of it. And really, I haven't known what to do about that. I'm looking at it right now. Because that guitar to me was really important. I watched the headstock of it for stops and for changes so many times. It's a really important part of my life, but also it's a really important artifact of Australian blues. So I'd love to put it on show somewhere, or invite people to have a play, or whatever it may be, because I think, there's some young musicians now that are listening to my stuff, and they're ripping off my licks, and they're doing the thing that I do, and maybe they're looking up to me in a similar way. But I want them to know where all that came from. I want them to know where the history of Australian blues leads. And as far as I can tell, all roads seem to lead to Dutch Tilders. So I'm just thinking of a way that I'll be able to honor his legacy, and maybe that guitar can still teach people a lesson or two. Maybe I'll bring it down, and you guys can pop it on show for me.
Yeah, I was just going to say that maybe we can stick it on stage when you're way out west.
I would love to have an Australian blues, museum of some sort, or an Australian blues week, where there's a gig and you can have a lot of stuff. You can have guitars from all of the heroes, and you can have interviews and articles and posters, and who knows? I mean, it's just such a rich family, the blues community, and I've always really loved it. I've always really felt at home in it, and I just love to see some of those memories. I was going through a box of my father's stuff the other day. He was heavily involved with the NBA. He was president and secretary and did the newsletter and all sorts of stuff. And I found all these old flyers, you know, from when you have to print them on an inkjet printer, you know, and just, you know, $10 for 10 bands, and the artists that were playing, and they're all memories for me, because I remember being at those things and just thinking that all my Christmases had come at once.
That's insane. Now, as you well know, I have got no ability as a musician, but Dutch was a big influence on me in a funny sort of way. I think I was 17 or 18, and we went to Melbourne Uni to see an Australian rock band. I can't remember who they are, but Dutch was the support. I never heard of him, and he came on stage and sat down and started playing. And at that moment, I found the blues. I thought, what is he playing? And from that moment, you know, I was hooked, absolutely hooked.
I hear that story quite a bit. I mean, my doctor said that to me at one point when I him, and people, and this is actually one thing that I do find with Dutch, other than, aside from all the other blues musicians in Australia, I find that people who aren't necessarily blues musicians or in the blues scene or know the blues scene, they certainly know him. I think he was a fixture for a long time in the Melbourne music community, and so many people have memories of him at venues or festivals. And so it's lovely to kind of know that he lives on that way.
Interesting. One more, Dutch. We used to have a little blues jam down at the old RSL, and we had the Dutchman come and play, and he wasn't a well man, but I still remember his rider. We had to take him home and supply a 6-pack of Heineken.
Yeah, I actually did a gig with him once where they in one of these shows where you'd play a gig. I think it was near Canberra somewhere, like in Murrum-Bateman, I think it was, small town, and at the end of the night you'd stay out the back. You know, they had a motel at the back, and yeah, I actually remember clearly him knowing that they'd stocked the Coke machine with Heinekens for him. Over there, press the Diet Coke button and get a Heineken out. You know, I think everyone in the scene's got a Dutch Tilda story, and a lot of them, look, as much as it can revolve around Heineken and the blues and all that sort of stuff, and he really was the picture of a blues man. I think a lot of the stories I've heard about him revolve around just tremendous kindness and an entertainer. I mean, Dutch was on well before the show. The minute he walked in the venue, he was on, and the minute and it wasn't off until he left the room. He was a presence regardless of whether he was on stage or not. He was always performing, and I think he loved that connection. I think he loved entertaining people. I think he really enjoyed chatting to everyone, and you know, he was often the center of the conversation.
Now, the last time we played at Way Out West, we bloody had to go down to the yacht club, and it finished up to be a good day. But I do remember your son Riley getting up to play with you. That must have been a bit of a buzz.
Yeah, you know, it's really the greatest joy I've had over the last couple of years. Riley's been really taking on to the guitar, and he's just turned 18, and we talk guitars a lot. And every time I visit him and every time he visits me, we end up sitting with a couple of acoustic guitars and playing songs. But what was interesting is I first started teaching him when he was very small, and he wasn't really that interested. Then I got him to play on my album. He played on This Time Tomorrow, just one little lick on a song that I looped and used as the basis of the song, just so that he could say he was on it. It was really to get his name on it. And also I was trying to nudge him to maybe get a bit more excited about playing the guitar. He came and played with me at the Thornbury Theatre. It was a wonderful experience. He was about 10, and everyone thought it was really cute and lovely. And then he kind of just didn't want anything to do with it after that. And it wasn't really until just prior to the great pause, he started to get on YouTube and start learning a lot. So I can't take credit for him as a guitar player. He's been a friend of mine who has a YouTube channel called Guitar Zero to Hero is where he's learning the guitar. And so quite often when we sit together, you'd think that it would be me showing him some stuff. It's actually him showing me what he's learned and me playing along. So I'm learning all these pop songs that I didn't even know existed. But look, he played with me at a Echuca Blues Festival, and he's just going from strength to strength as a player. Having him on stage and having Lisa on stage feels like a real you know, and I mean, Tim Burnham's, you know, practically family, and my little brother Marty will come and sit in from time to time. Those sorts of things, having people you really care for, who really love you and know you so well on stage, it's a great feeling. But yeah, watching your son playing the guitar and seeing him pull the same weird faces that you pull, there is a real joy in that. You know, whether he continues to, I think he'll always play. I don't think he has an interest in being a professional player, but he certainly will always love playing music and loves his guitars. So I think we'll always have that to talk about. That and the St Kilda Football Club. That's what we have to discuss now that he's 18. He's off living his own life.
Now, tell us about your relationship with the wonderful guitar luthiers at Cole Clark. They've been sort of integral to your career.
Yeah, really instrumental. They are, you know, so Cole Clark guitars have been around 22 years now. They've got about 60,000 guitars out there around the world. And so they're a major manufacturer for Australia in a country that doesn't make anything anymore. It's really amazing that we have two, you know, world recognized guitar companies in Melbourne. And Cole Clark, when they started, they basically needed a guinea pig, and they'd seen me play, and they invited me down to the factory. And we just found that we had for lack of a better term, there was something organic about it. I was looking for something, and they were trying to find it as well. And what we were looking for was a natural sounding acoustic. I'd never felt that acoustic guitars, once plugged in, really gave you the same sound you had when you were just jamming in your living room. All those the nuance of your fingers and the sound of the actual wood was gone. You get this electronic, digitally kind of sounding noise, this quacky kind of sound. And so they started working towards it, and I just followed and advised and said, I like this and I don't like that. I've never been technically minded, but I've always been able to say clearly what I like and what I don't. And so that relationship grew into something really amazing. And now I get to see, you know, guitars that I had a hand in designing, and pickups that I had a hand in voicing, just being played all over the world by people. And, you know, I say often, and because you've been doing your homework this week, Rob, you probably have read this somewhere. I just want to know, I think the ultimate goal in music is to have a link in the chain of its evolution, and to be, you know, a part of it where people forever will go, that's a part of how we got here. And I want to be one of those links. And whether that's through my own performing or mentoring young musicians, or helping to design guitars that change the sound of Australian music, I don't mind how that link happens, as long as it happens. And so Cole Clark's been like a side project that's turned into a real passion. And quite frankly, I can't do my show without a Cole Clark guitar. It is the instrument that I require. It's designed really to do what I do. And now this new guitar, which is a true hybrid instrument, which you'll see shortly when I come play for you, is really it's 10 years of work to really take my show to the next level. And the orders are thick and fast. Everybody seems to want one. But really, you know, it all started with me trying to put an electric guitar pickup in my guitar and wondering why it didn't work properly. And then we went from it's impossible to, you know, hundreds of orders in a matter of 3 years.
Sensational, mate. Yeah, I remember you telling us about it just recently up at the Echuca Blues Festival. It was a real eye-opener. Can you tell us about some of the guys that really influenced you? I mean, blues is such a wide spectrum of music. Is there one little area that you like to channel into?
Look, I would love to pull out some kind of, you know, obscure names, and there are a few. When it comes to the big names, it was always those legends, you know, B.B. King and you know, St. Terry and Brownie McGee were an enormous influence on me, and I was fortunate enough to play with Brownie in his garage before he passed away, and spends that time with him. You know, Luther Allison, Otis Rush, all of those guys, you know, Muddy Waters. And there are certain albums for me that really triggered something. And then there's a lot of people, because I went to the States when I was quite young and spent a fair bit of time there. And there were a lot of guys sort of coming up who who really inspired me that people here may not have heard of, like Guy Forsyth, obviously, you know, Tommy Castro, and who I got to do one you know, sit in with briefly, and people like that were pushing the boundary. And for me, it was always about artists who could find the balance. You know, it's a really hard thing. Blues is an old music, and it doesn't belong. So taking a genre that's kind of perfect, and then trying to find a new way to approach it, I've always found that balance really interesting. So, you know, someone like Tom Waits, Guy Forsyth, who, if you don't know him, you should absolutely check him out. He's incredible. You know, these are artists that were, you know, kind of, you know, Corey Harris is another one, who were kind of able to somehow walk that tightrope between really paying respect to the traditions of blues music and finding a completely different way to deliver it for today's audience, and to remarket it and repackage it for the masses. And I've always wanted to do that, and I think I've slowly started. It's been hard for me because, you know, I grew up in a scene that was really a traditional blues music scene. You know, I mean, you know, the first, you know, iteration of the elders around the blues community that I grew up in, you know, like Stevie Ray Vaughan was probably too far gone. Jimi Hendrix was definitely too far gone. So it took me a little while to sort of have the guts to step outside and see what was happening outside those straight bompers. And yeah, so now I just look for anyone who's trying to make, because, you know, this term, and I'm sorry I'm just going on, but I'm passionate about this. The term "keep blues alive," which gets used by blues societies all over the planet, I think it's a great idea. I don't think it's always been practiced particularly well. And for me, you know, I never understood why jazz music, country music, soul music, funk music, rock and roll, all these other styles change with the times and keep moving all the time to be relevant. But blues music, there's a lot of people who kind of feel, well, blues music stopped here, and everything you do has to sound like it was made before then. Look, I love all that stuff, but you know, I definitely feel that, you know, as I still feel like I'm a young man. I'm 44 years old. I hope I've got some time left. I've always felt that, you know, well, how do you get younger people to listen to it? How do you make it relevant for today? And again, while still paying respects to its tradition, which is something that I guess, you know, rock and roll doesn't necessarily have to do, and country music doesn't necessarily have to do. But those traditions, being that it's a bloodline, it's someone else's bloodline, I think that's really important. So it is a tough thing. So I just love. I mean, Luther Allison for me was one who I think not long before he passed, he completely changed modern blues. He was still playing 12 bars. It was still the same kind of outfit, but it was just this approach to it that felt fresh. And he's one of the last of those great blues legends where you can say you knew it was him 2 notes in. That's what we'd all love. We'd all love to people to say, "Oh, I know who that is," as soon as you start.
You did mention Guy Forsyth. Yeah, I had 2 CDs of his, and Corey Harris is interesting because he's really taken blues music back to Africa.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, well, you know, we often say, you know, blues music being a foundation music in modern Western music, that, you know, it helped to create jazz and country and soul and all these other genres. And it's really cool to kind of borrow back from the genres it helped to create and infuse it back into blues music to try and create something new or create something different, or a new branch, if you like. But you know, Corey had the foresight to go backwards and really delve into, well, you know, rock and roll didn't begin and end with the 12-bar blues. It goes further back than that, and there's probably something we missed. It's like watching a film for a second time and saying, I hadn't spotted that, you know. like watching Grease as a child and then watching it as an adult and swearing it's a completely different movie. So that's kind of, it's nice to go back and see what we may have missed. And I think we all still do that with blues records, but Corey Harris has taken it to the next level.
Now, I do read, I've got all of Pauline Bailey's fantastic books, the blues portraits. And when you were interviewed, you said that you think that you're a social worker. And I've heard Galliotti say that too. Can you expand on that?
Well, so I don't have any real delusions of grandeur about music, you know. I mean, I just saw Paul McCartney recently. I mean, music can change the world. There's no question about it. I don't necessarily think mine is, and I've never actually been under the delusion that I'm a huge music fan as far as playing musical instruments. I don't practice at home much. I love to connect with people. The instrument is the thing I use, but I'm definitely an entertainer before I'm a musician. So I guess an audience comes in, they all sit down. My number one thought is, how do I make these people leave happier than they came in? Not how do I make them impressed? How do I inspire them to play the blues guitar? It's about how do I make them smile and leave feeling better than they did when they walked in. I don't know these people. And what they do in their personal lives is a mystery to me. My only job is to give them a couple of hours off. You know, it's just entertainment. And I love the simplicity of that. I love that it's, you know, the skies will not fall if I play a bung note. It's all about just accepting that my place in life is to entertain and to make people feel, you know, excited and happy. And so, yeah, I definitely feel, I mean, the social worker thing actually comes from a time where, you know, people do approach me quite often and they tell me, oh, well, you know, this album, I listened to this album, it became my chemotherapy album. When I go into chemo, I put this playlist on of your music and it helped me get through it. And for me, I'm so honored and touched by that. I'm so blown away by the idea that there are people listening to my music when I'm just home kicking about watching YouTube, that, you know, that you start to wonder, well, is that true? Did I help that guy? Well, who am I to tell him that I didn't? You know, and that's something that my dad said to me years ago. I was about 19 or 20. This kid wanted me to sign his guitar, and I flat out refused. I just didn't want to wreck his guitar because I didn't think much of myself. And on the way home, my dad said, "Why didn't you sign that kid's guitar?" And I said, "Because I'm nobody." And my dad said, "Who are you to ruin that for him?" And I've always felt that, you know, you've got yourself as a human and then yourself as this entity, this entertainer, and you've put yourself out there and you're vulnerable. You're honest with your audience. You know, a lot of my songs are pretty dark and they can be about all manner of things in my life. I'm pretty much an open book. It would be awful for me to switch that off after the show and not let that honesty be reciprocated. So I do spend a lot of time listening to people. I do spend a lot of time kind of counseling people and just talking about what my music's meant to them. And I never tell them, oh, that's not how it was intended, or that's not what I wrote that about, because it's really not up to me to say.
Well, music is the healer, mate. It is the healer.
I don't even think touched on scratched the surface of what music's capable of doing in that way.
We away out west like to call ourselves a big family. Do you find when you're on the road that even overseas that it is a family? It is indeed a place where everyone looks out for each other?
Well, certainly. I mean, you know, when I started traveling to the States, I was underage, well and truly underage for the US. And I never found myself staying in a hotel more than one night. You know, there'd always be if you went to the local blues jam, the local blues society, the local blues club would take you in, introduce you to everybody, and then you'd stay with their president for the week. You know, this was a normal kind of thing. And I think that still happens quite a lot. Connecting with blues societies is something that is, you know, it's really functioning the way it was designed. And country seems to know each other. These days, the world gets a bit smaller. So the amount of times that I've been in a blues club in Canada or in the Netherlands or in Japan, and somebody tells me about a radio show they listen to in Australia, or a friend that they have who's a friend that happens to be a friend of mine who plays in the blues scene, which is it's actually not doing much for that cliche that Americans think we all know each other over here, but because it appears to do. But there's a real community around it, and I think that comes from the advocacy side of the blues world, where I'm a musician and you're a promoter and you're a venue and you're all these sorts of things, and the fans, they all kind of connect in via this idea of protecting this music and promoting this music. And so that's the great leveler. Our love for the music means that the musicians and the fans and everybody in between are kind of all on the same playing field and just all trying to do the same thing. That, because you definitely, when you're playing any kind of minority form of music, you're definitely an advocate. Part of you got to promote your own career, you've got to make a living, but there's also this advocacy side of you where you're trying to put your best foot forward on behalf of the music that you love.
You mentioned two countries, which leads into my next question. I was going to ask, you've had so much success in Canada and Japan, but they're poles apart. Why do you think the Japanese like blues music?
So blues music in Japan is a very different world, and I'm kind of not really in it. Their blues world is kind of like a Civil War reenactment. They all dress the part and play the Muddy Waters record the same way that Muddy Waters did it, with all the mistakes as well. Yeah. Because of course they've got the 12-bar music form, these songs, but when you don't have the language, the thing that separates the songs is the lyrics. So when you don't have the language, you make sure that the sound is perfect. This is exactly the beat that was played. This is exactly the bass line that was played. This is exactly that, because they're trying to replicate it as close as possible without the lyrics to really to understand the lyrics and their meaning. The scene that I was really in Japan was sort of the guitar scene, that Cole Clark had become quite popular there. So the venues that I was playing were kind of rock clubs, and then have 5 or 6 acts on every night. And then I'd come on, and because I was the international guest, they put me on last after 5 bands, and I'd do a solo blues set for a group of 20-somethings, and Japanese 20-somethings who probably never heard blues before, and just felt like they were hearing something new. So that allowed me to kind of create this kind of cult following in Japan of people who thought I invented the acoustic blues guitar. I wish I knew another way to explain it, but it was just this strange and very surreal time. I was not a huge rock star in life, but I did have this core following where everywhere I played, it was just absolutely chock-a-block full of people. And being that Japan has a fanatical kind of attitude to these kinds of things, it just made it so wild, because they were really, really into it, and everybody wanted to have a photo, and it was just a really, that was where I guess I learned that, the social work side of music, that this is about more than playing music. It's actually about connecting with humans in a way that I couldn't connect with any other. I couldn't talk to these people. Yeah. So that was pretty amazing. Touring countries when people don't speak English is the challenge. That's the hard challenge. I can't tell my stories, can't tell my jokes. I've got to rely on body movement and eye rolls and all this sort of stuff that I have to really think about. The Czech Republic was an eye-opener for that reason, because I found people just didn't speak English, and that was amazing. Whereas Canada, obviously, everyone speaks English. Canada, I found my people. I definitely found my people. Here's a country that borders the US, so their understanding of blues is total. They completely get it. They've got a very similar sense of humor to Australians, being a colony themselves. And because of they've got this Gaelic and Celtic influence, where, especially on the East Coast, where songwriting, acoustic music, and storytelling is really, really important to the culture. And so I love to tell a story. And in a blues club, quite often you get told to just get on with it. But I love to tell my stories, and I love connecting with the audience that way. So I definitely found Canada, just dropping me in Canada and doing the exact show that I want to do in Australia was so easy. And that's, I guess, led to me being able to do more and more over there. But every country has its own challenges, its own way of, its own way of changing your show, and you've got to alter it just a little bit. There are some, the Netherlands, everyone speaks English, but it's a very literal English. So some of my sarcasm doesn't sit, and they wonder why I'm saying something awful about my dad or something. Great. It's always great to have a challenge. And after so many years of playing, anything that I have to change is good, because it challenges me.
Yeah. Talking about Canada, Charlie Accord, what a fantastic musician that man is. We had him at the RSL, and we didn't pull a big crowd, but he should be so well known. Tell us about Charlie, and if people don't know who he is, why should they know about him?
So yeah, so Charlie and I are friends. We met because we have these showcase events in Canada. It's really how you get booked for tours over there. I went to this showcase, and part of the deal was that they had this, it's a Canadian Music Week thing, and there's been a reciprocal agreement where you send a couple of Australian musicians over as a kind of, it's like being a foreign exchange student for the week. And part of the deal is that they put you online and introduce you to a Canadian musician, and you have to write a song together and perform it in the main theatre. I'd never written a song with anyone else in my entire life, and there's Charlie Accord, and we got along really well. We had a bit of a chat, but the day that we actually got together to talk, I was in Brussels. Across the street, a bomb had just gone off, and a terrorist attack in the subway there at the airport, the Brussels airport. And so I was quite shaken up and feeling pretty alone. So the first time I ever met Charlie Accord, I was just happy to be talking in English to somebody. And so I vented to him for about an hour, and that was our first meeting. And then we wrote this song together about that, actually, which he really took under, he really went with and wrote this beautiful song. And we became fast friends. And we've actually just done a whole bunch of dates together with another artist named Susie Vinnick, who is, again, one of the most gifted and kind humans. The two of them are so similar that way. Charlie is one of those songwriters that every time you hear him play a song that he's written, you'll go, I wish I'd have written that. He's really got a lot of those, and he blows my mind. I'm a huge fan, and the last time he was in Australia, he played way out west, and I went along and kind of roadied for him, because I really believe he's one of these artists that everybody should hear. We made an album together that we released for this tour we just did in March. It's called Accord, Spiegel, and Vinnick. And the three of us kind of all just put songs in and recorded them in different parts of the world, and then got together and performed them on this 30-show tour. And that was really wonderful. I going back to international touring after such a time off can be kind of scary. And I do a lot of touring by myself overseas. So having people I cared about, that I knew, who I could rely on, that felt like family, people like Susie and Charlie, that was just a really smart way to get back to touring for all three of us. But no, he is planning to come back, I'm told.
Good.
He's always planning to come back. He does love it over here, but Australia's been hard for him. Canada, look, I don't want to burst the bubble or be controversial, Rob, but Canada has the music scene on a different level to what Australia has. I've just done 70 shows in Canada this year, and those shows, are in these beautiful theaters. And that's not because I've gotten popular there or anything like that. It's actually, the reality is that there's a network of venues like that work, but they work within governments and councils, and they get funded because they get funded to put seasons on of music and arts and comedy and plays and all sorts of things. And I'm just part of that season because they believe, the Canadian government believes that art is important and that it's essential to the culture of their country. And so you can tour and get guaranteed fees and know exactly what you're going to earn on the tour. You can really plan it from there. There's a whole lot of gates that open to help you make that happen. Whereas Australia, it is a slog. It is a much tougher slog. And that's why I'm so thankful to people like yourself, clubs who just make it so easy to walk on in. You know who you're going to promote to. You know you've got a crowd that comes along and you're going to get behind it. But, as you know, that's extremely time consuming. And the passion for it can wane from time to time as your personal life changes. So, but having the government and councils really behind it the way that Canada does, it's been much easier to climb that ladder. I think that there's good in both. I think that the work ethic of an Australian musician is really, really go get them. And I love that, whereas I guess there are probably artists in Canada who are happy just playing the showcase events for the rest of their life. But Australian musicians have had to fight. And so there's a real spirit amongst them that I love. But yeah, Charlie will be back. We'll play something together in Australia, I'm sure. He'll probably stay at my house and borrow my guitars.
Beautiful. I was going to ask about, Way Out West is more like a juke joint, and you get to play in some incredible, prestigious concert halls because I watched the photos that you put up. But you will always put on a show, whether you're playing in front of 500 people or 100 people. I guess it's really important no matter the size of the audience, they've shown up to watch you play, and the show must go on.
Yeah, Jeff Atchison said to me once when I was young, very young, I was teen still, and I was upset about how few people had bought tickets to a gig or were at a gig or something. And Jeff said to me, well, you can't blame that. You can't blame the ones that are here. You can't. And I think the thing he said, and you, why aren't there more of you? Where's the rest of you? And so people deserve the show that they paid to see, but also it's your own dignity. It's your own. My approach is always to sound as good as I can and to play as well as I can and to knock out anyone that's there. That's the mission. And look, sometimes, I remember a show, there are shows in smaller venues that end up being some of the best on the tour, no doubt about it, because there's a closeness with the crowd. And I love that closeness. This Canadian tour that Lisa and I played to 7,000 people at the Montreal Jazz Festival, and then did a house concert the next day for 8 people. Because sometimes people hire you. Canadians do this house concert thing where it's not a party. It's not like you would in Australia where you play and everyone comes and has a drink. It's like a sit down. They turn their backyards into amphitheaters, and they have serious house concerts, like really big deal. They cater for it. It's all the thing, and everyone buys tickets and they come. But some people decide that they just want 3 or 4 of their friends to come, and then they sit and listen to you and then grill you about your songs, about your guitar. So you have everything. But I didn't try any less at the house concert. I think it's just a different approach. It's like playing in a different country or playing with a different band or there's just a different approach. But how do you put your best foot forward in the situation you're in? And of course, there's the old thing that you've got to treat every gig like it's the one you want to be at, not necessarily the one that you're at, because that's how you get to those other ones.
Yeah, cool. And do you have one horror story of being on the road and one wow, I can't believe that happened story?
I've got hundreds, Rob. It's not particularly glamorous, but I remember playing a gig in somewhere in, I think it was like Nebraska or somewhere around there. It might have been in regional Illinois, whatever it was, where I played the gig, and they told me that I had accommodation supplied, but the accommodation was a couch at the venue. So I played a gig, and it went terribly wrong, terribly wrong. Like, just nobody liked what I was doing at all. And then at the end of the night, they simply just locked the doors, left me to sleep, left me in there with a pillow and a blanket. And then at 8 o'clock in the morning, that I got woken up by the cleaner coming in. And this was like a juke joint, you know. This was like it was bizarre. It was utterly bizarre. But I had another one where I'd actually been beaten up prior to the gig. I walked up the street to get some food. This was in a regional Queensland, like deep into Queensland, and I won't name the town, but I got beaten up quite badly, and I got back to the bar, and it was 8:05, and I was meant to start at 8 o'clock, and I was bleeding, and all my clothes were all torn, and I was bruised and battered quite badly. I probably should have gone to a hospital. And the publican looked at me and tapped his watch and said, "Do you want to get paid tonight or what?" Tell you what, lucky. I mean, that doesn't happen so much anymore. I hope to the young musicians traveling because of social media. Those people that get cancelled pretty quickly. And that particular gig, I should say, I actually was playing, and they were shouting at me. There was about 10 blokes in the place. They were shouting at me to play songs that they know, right? Because sometimes people just say, right, I've decided on the list. That's the list of songs I know. I don't want to hear anything else. I'm done. And I wouldn't play them because I didn't know them. And so they were flicking their bottle caps at me all night. So I'm bloody and bruised and getting my bottle caps flicked at me. And yeah, it's actually what had happened at that gig. And sorry to go on about this, but
that's cool.
I was young. I would have been like 19, 20. What actually happened that was that my agent at the time heard about it, called the venue a couple of days later, and the publican had no idea what he was talking about, because what had happened is he was out of town and had closed the pub so he could go out of town for a funeral. And we were dry calling gigs. So we had a Friday that got cancelled, so we were just dry calling gigs, and he called this venue asking if they needed any music because I was driving through, and that's the way it was done back then. My God. And the cleaner was in there, and he answered the phone and thought, oh yeah, it'd be a good idea to get some music in while the boss is gone, and I'll open the pub just for my mates. So I've actually accidentally played a private party for a pack of absolute jerks without even realizing it. So there you have it. We can get sucked in, but look, I've certainly paid my dues, Rob. I've done plenty of gigs where no one listened. I did a gig. I've done gigs where I've played a couple of songs, and people have actually gone and plugged in the jukebox and started playing the jukebox. I had a bloke actually physically move me out of the way while I was playing a song so he could get to his favorite pokey machine. I've had shout unimaginable things, but the truth is, most people respect what's going on, and it's unfortunately, part of paying your dues is kind of pushing through those shows that are hard, and to learn what it is that, because when you're young, someone's going to pay me $150 to play music, I'll be there. And of course, as you start to learn that, well, there's things that I want out of life and things that I don't want out of life, and being pushed out of the way so a bloke can get to his pokies is not one of them.
You've got this power trio of Tim Burnham on drums, Lisa Baird on trumpet, and it works so well on so many levels. But a trumpet and the blues is not something, a trombone, I should be saying, not trumpet, trombone and the blues is not something that you see. How did that come about, that dynamic?
Well, so I had a couple of songs on previous albums that I wanted, that kind of had this kind of New Orleans feel to them. And I knew Lisa. I was actually going to put trumpet on them. But because I knew Lisa, and she played trombone. I'd known her for many years. I invited her down to play. That was the path of least resistance. Just who do I know who can play something New Orleansy? And she did a great job. And then she started joining us for the shows. We became partners at that time, and then the reality was that she started to fit into those songs that really fit the trombone. And then over the lockdowns, we were here together with the 5 kids, her 3 and my 2, and it was quite mad. And we started going through some of my old material and realizing that a lot of the stuff that I'd never performed is because I just felt I didn't have enough layers to them to perform live. You could overdub in the studio, but there was just things that they didn't sound complete live. And so we started fooling around with some melodic lines. And the truth is, a trombone doesn't fit into a lot of my music. And what Lisa's done is used the trombone as a bass line, or as a melody line, or as almost like you'd use a string section. She sort of morphs because had to add this extra layer, and she hears layers that I didn't know existed, because we have 2 very different paths with music. We've come at it from very different angles, and so having a set of ears like hers that are so vastly different to mine, she can hear things in the songs, and so we just gave them a try, really, and just to try it out, and it turned out that people really responded to it. That some of these songs sounded really complete. I mean, the Bakehouse Dozen album is essentially a rework of a bunch of songs now that we've got this trio sound. This trio sound combined with this hybrid guitar that's been invented, I can now do things on stage that weren't possible with just me and Tim and my standard guitar. So yeah, it's and also there's enough guitar, drums, and bass blues acts out there. How do I make my mark? How do I try and make it different? How do I invent my own style? And that's for the 3 of us to get together and just see what happens when we throw these things out there. And look, she is a tremendously talented individual and has brought so much to the table. It's frightening sometimes, the pace that she works. So I've just hung on for dear life, and kind of, Lisa will come to the table with a bunch of ideas, and they'll be way too far out for me, because I'm not a very far out kind of guy, and she is musically very far out. So what tends to happen is we'll sort of push at each other and meet in the middle somewhere, and the result is what I think is my most varied and dynamic show ever.
Yeah, you're right about that, mate. That was my next question too, that the new album Bakehouse Dozen's out. Can you tell us a little bit about that album? And you know what I loved when I was over at Echuca is watching your kids, the merch kids, selling the album. It was fantastic. They had it down pat.
Good job of that. Yeah, my youngest and Lisa's youngest, Mickey and Levi, they are inseparable when they're together, and they are a force to be reckoned with, I can tell you what. And they knew all the songs, and they knew which one to sell you. They knew what was going on. It's great. And we love having all the kids on the road if we can. It's not always viable, but when we can, we do. Look, yeah, Bakehouse Dozen, every 4th album of mine has always been a live album, right back to Midnight Special. And I did the live at the Continental. I did the Spiegel tent double live set, and then we did these 3 studio albums and decided it was time for a new live album. And the reason I've always done that is because between recording them and touring them for a few years, the songs quite often change and grow with you and change their sound, and so the live version doesn't match the album version anymore. And also as a marker, a bit of a okay, here's this era in my career. And the last 3 albums, Cut and Run, Backroads, This Time Tomorrow, kind of fit together in a trilogy because they were released in pretty quick succession. So, how have those songs changed, especially after a pandemic and all that time off? The world's changed, we've changed, and we also want to offer the audience the opportunity to buy the album that sounds exactly like they just saw on stage. We didn't have an album with the full trio, so the idea kind of do another live album, but let's do it different. Let's do it without an audience in a controlled environment. So we went to Bakehouse Studios in Richmond and honestly loaded into one of the coolest rooms they've got, and on a hot day with no air conditioner, and brought a film crew and brought Rob Dylan, and he set up all his gear. We faffed about for 2 hours trying to get the sounds right, and then honestly hit record, and a couple of hours later we had a record.
Fantastic. Make sure you bring plenty of them to the gig.
I'll certainly try. I'll load them all up. I tell you, the vinyls are what goes crazy at the moment. It's everyone wants the vinyl. I've actually had to order more, which is great. I've never had to do that before with vinyl. Yeah, there's it, and for me, it's just a great. I just love holding vinyl and going, I made a vinyl, because that's what I wanted as a kid. So, but look, yeah, it's been going really well. Audiences have responded to the show really well. People have responded to the album really well, and I think it's probably partly because I'm in a really happy place. I'm not feeling the desperation that of the music business like I have in the past. There's been a thing in me that's driven me to almost a desperate point where you're just pushing all the time and you sort of base who you are on your musical success. And I'm past that at this point now. I'm just happy in my life. I'm making music when I feel like it. And I'm happy if it doesn't get if I don't get any more popular than I am now, that's totally fine. I'm making a living and I'm happy, and I've got my family, and having them more around me than ever is really joyful. And there's definitely a feeling on stage. I mean, Tim's been working with me for 15 years. There's a real family unit on stage now, and we all feel like we're driving the right direction. And actually, I guess after the pandemic, we're all feeling more thankful for our job than ever, less likely to take it for granted, and probably hitting our actual skills peak right around now. We're definitely all feeling like we're the best musicians we've been.
Well, we can't wait to see you, mate. Playing at Way Out West, Sunday the 19th, 2 to 5 p.m. We're going to have a ball. Thanks for having a chat with me, mate. I really enjoyed it. And safe travels, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, my friend. We'll see you next week.